Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Oscar Buzz. It is review time. We haven't reviewed a movie in a second, but it is time to get into one. And what a film to get into! Today, we're talking about RaMell Ross's debut narrative feature, Nickel Boys, and the fact that this is his debut. My God.
Yeah. And I also think the fact that we have a lot of, obviously, we've not done a review for a while. There's a lot of films on the list that we both have seen and want to review, obviously. But there is a reason that this, I think, is it's the first one we've chosen to review because it feels monumental. It feels big. It is easily, after having only seen it today, easily one of the best films of the year, I think so far, and I think that is fairly unanimously decided. And yeah, this film was worthy of all the flowers and worthy of conversations about it, I feel.
Yeah, and it's also one that I only foresee growing on me the more I sit with it and the more I rewatch it, because I do plan on rewatching this at least once in the coming weeks, to be honest, after I get through some other projects that I'm trying to catch up on. But I mean, it's just really a film that it can take a second to get into it. So it is shot almost exclusively through first person perspective, with how it is using its cinematography, right? And that can immediately come across as gimmicky. And it can, I can see how that would be taking people out of it. For me, it worked, but it feels experimental in that way. It feels like something bold, and it can take a second to settle into it, but once you do, like, it's captivating. And it takes you on this really kind of harrowing journey, but it never lets that bleakness ever become so overwhelming that it becomes a difficult watch, which I think it almost could have, to be honest, gone to darker places. This has gotten comparisons to Jonathan Glazer's The Zone of Interest, which for me was the best film of last year and quite possibly the best film of the decade so far. So, it could have gone there, but I also don't know if it needed to really to be as effective as it was.
No, and that kind of first-person perspective way of shooting really works in some moments. That's not to say it doesn't work throughout the film, but in certain moments, you really understand why that decision was made and why that decision was perhaps the only way of telling this. We're doing spoilers, I'd imagine.
We're doing spoilers. All of our reviews always do spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film, come back to the discussion later.
But yes, so when Elwood dies, obviously, the fact that we are restricted from seeing Turner's face is something that I found was a really interesting decision to have, sort of the pivotal emotional moment of the film. None of that, you never see his face, you never see really his reaction to it. And the fact that you get a sort of hindsight perspective through the flash forwards and the kind of non-linear storytelling that also could have felt like a bit of a gimmick. Okay, we're doing this in sort of a non-linear fashion.
Yeah.
Like, that is another thing that is sort of another formal element that is tacked on, kind of. But it all combines to really work and create this kind of unified vision that I don't know if I quite got that kind of revolutionary feel that I got from something like Zone of Interest. I don't know if it ever felt that I was watching something completely new, completely different, something I'd never seen before. But equally, I think that is a testament to the assurity in the filmmaking that it didn't ever come across as, whoa, this is the first person film, whatever. It just felt natural to the story it was telling. And therefore, you kind of stop noticing it in a very weird way. As much as on the surface, saying a film's shot in first person perspective, you'd immediately presume, okay, well, that's noticeable throughout. You lose it. You don't notice it towards it as you get through the story, as you get more engrossed in this story, as you become captivated slowly over time, you lose at that thing. And then when it does come back, really at that emotional pivotal moment, it just works and it really comes back in a very powerful way, and it makes you reassess and it makes you notice that was how the film was shot the entire time.
Yeah, and it is really just the deftness and the care that RaMell Ross takes with his camera. And it is shot by Joe Mofre, who did All Dirt Road's Taste of Salt, which I know you weren't as. Did you even see that film?
Yes, I did, and I loved certain shots in it. I didn't think it was
Yeah,
and so I can see why it really worked. His kind of style really worked in this film and in this story.
yeah,
I felt All Dirt Rose Tastes of Salted didn't quite have the story to
sure.
back up what it
I
was doing.
I yeah, I think that it's definitely more traditional. It's weird to call a film like Nickel Boys more conventional or traditional, but it certainly is more so than All Dirt Road Taste of Salt. All Dirt Road Taste of Salt for me is one of the best films of the decade. I absolutely love that film. And I was very excited, even before I really knew much about Nickel Boys, just by Joe Frey shooting this. And I think that they've, you know, maybe had the best work of the year, to be honest with this. Because as you say, like, it is innovative to shoot something in first person, but also to make it feel natural, to make it feel not like a gimmick. And you brought up some of those flash forward sequences. The one that I keep coming back to, after, and thinking about the film afterwards, is like the conversation in the bar, right? And it is just those little moments where it does clue us in, I guess, to
Mm.
the final twist, if you want to call it that, and just kind of the uncertainty of information and the entire film with how it's shot. I think even more so than it being shot like in first person. The thing that stood out to me was that it's shot like a memory almost, and every single thing about how the film was constructed when we are, in the past, it feels like a memory that doesn't belong to anybody almost, in the way that it just kind of is aimlessly drifting. And you have the camera that will tilt to the floor, and yes, that works within the first person perspective and that, conceit of the film, right? But I think it also works very much in portraying this very uncertain retelling of information, I guess, in the way that the narrative feels uncertain, but because RaMell Ross's voice is so strong and certain, it never feels like the film is losing itself in a way that, like, something like All Dirt Road's Taste of Salt, you might say that it did. For me, it worked for different reasons than this film, because I do think that they're trying to do different things. But yeah, it feels so confident and assured despite, intentionally being so uncertain.
Yeah, and I think, like a memory in many ways, there is sort of a weird sense of it's sort of a weird blend of optimism and tragedy that you get within the
Yeah.
film that I really appreciated. Like, as you said, it could have gone to just this very dark tone. It could have just gone for that throughout. But no, you actually enjoy seeing Elwood and Turner create this relationship and craft that. And it does feel very personal in that way, as much as there is that kind of universality of it all. And it's sort of, as you say, like, I agree to much an extent. It does feel like kind of a memory that can't really be placed on one specific person. It feels very broad. It feels, and that is part of the reason it feels so powerful and important. But it still has that very personal aspect there, and a lot of that is also due to the first person perspective way of shooting things. So it's doing a very weird multitasking act, a sort of paradoxical multitasking act
Mhm.
of making you really view it as if it was your experience and creating that sort of universal sense, whilst also making you sit back within their own character's perspective and feeling their personal way of operating this world and sort of viewing this world. So it's sort of paradoxical, some of the stuff that the cinematography and the camera work is doing in this,
Yeah,
but
and
it
it's
all
different.
works.
Like, it's a high wire act
Yeah.
that somehow manages to not topple over, because he's
Mm.
bouncing so many different things, and also both these perspectives. Because then, we're also kind of exploring two diametrically opposing perspectives when we're switching back and forth between our two lead characters, who are Elwood and Turner is the other one.
Kind of.
Yeah, and obviously we're physically moving back and forth between the two perspectives in the way that we're cutting, which we'll get into the editing later, but
Mm.
applause. We're also taking a look at two different perspectives when it comes to power and institutional violence, and the civil rights movement and all of these different types of things. And in this contrast of optimism and faith in finding a better world within the system, for Elwood. And then you also have Turner, who is very very much in the state of mind of the system is already too far against us. The only way to escape is to get out. And they have this conversation about how to escape Nickel, right? Like how do you get out? And they have these conversations on, you either run away, you die, right? And Elwood's persistent on like, no, you can work your way out, all these different types of things. And it very much feels like a microcosm, just the two of them between, for these much bigger issues. Like you can draw comparisons to like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, right? And I think it's really fascinating to, to take such a subjective lens and to never give us an objective perspective between the two of them. You can never really frame one as having more power or being more correct than the other through the language of the camera. You can only see it from this really specific myopic lens, right? That doesn't allow for any objectivity to creep in. And we often talk about films that they don't allow for subjectivity to creep in and they're purely objective. And this is I wouldn't say the first, but it joins a fair few films that never really offers an objective perspective. And you only see this subjective perspective, and you can see how each of their their ideations on these different ideas are formed based off of what each of them are directly seeing through their own eyes, and how different experiences and lived experiences, material conditions, etc., can shape these altering perspectives.
Yeah, no, for sure. And because of it, from what I know about the book, I've not read the book, but I know it's very sort of filled with like interior musings and stuff like that. And it is all told from very differing perspectives and very clear perspectives. And it's the kind of thing that could have been lost in film. But it's what makes it such an interesting adaptation specifically of this source material, because there is a version of this film it's a lot more simple. And I still think there could have even been a fairly decent version of this film that doesn't use this interesting camera work and is just sort of a fairly standard telling of this story. Because all of those themes that you were mentioning, sort of the differing in perspectives, Nickel as a microcosm for society at large, they are still apparent in the story. You didn't have to use the camera to do that.
Right.
But what the camera does is it opens up the conversation a bit more. It removes, as you say, that sort of objectivity in it, and it keeps the sort of interior monologues that you can get from characters in book form, but translates that into film in a way that I've not really seen before. That kind of translation from book to film and achieving similar things using that kind of interior monologue. It's just something that most films choose not to do.
Because it's hard.
Exactly.
And it's very easy to get wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that's what makes RaMell Ross, again, for this to be a debut narrative feature as well, is just so ridiculous to take this big of a swing, and to be, as we said, that this confident and assured that he can pull this off, and then to go and do it, and to back that confidence up, is genuinely, I mean, it's ridiculous. Like this is, and I think it's what makes it feel like such a special feat of cinema, to be honest. And just how big of a swing was taken, how I mean, it really couldn't have done, gone any better with the route that Ross chose. And he does what all the best directors do, in that he takes what already was a good screenplay and elevates it and brings out all of the strongest elements of it.
Yeah. And he's definitely aided in doing that by brilliant performances all around. I think that they can often go unnoticed in a film like this, where the direction is so strong and the vision seems so unified. It seems kind of like the actors were just always placed in there. But there is a reason they do just feel so natural in these roles. Like they didn't just come down and end up in the film. Like these are brilliant performances that are at the core of the film as well. I think in particular, Anjanou Ellis steals every scene she's in and really becomes a focal point of the film without being there for much of it. Her presence is sort of always looming large, and that is the kind of key to a good supporting performance. And then the two leads, Ethan Heresy and Brandon Wilson, they are both, I mean, stunning. I've not seen them in anything else. But I'd love to see them do other stuff, really, because they sell their relationship and that sort of dynamic and the way that relationship builds so naturally and so well. And that's a really hard thing to do when a lot of it is filmed in first person perspective and you don't see their face. it's a very hard task. But even through just like, this is weird to say, like the sort of back acting that we get on after Elwood's death, he sells it, and you never see his face. And the
Mhm.
fact that we as an audience can't get that connection to him, we can't get his eyes on it, is because, and that is all part of it, because we can't live this experience. We've never lived this experience. We never will live
Right.
this experience again, hopefully. But you're still able to capture it and understand it, which is a really hard balancing act that I think is equally attributed to the performances in it.
Yeah, no, I'd 100% agree. And just kind of talking about the editing, I suppose. Like, I think it dealing with, because this is obviously, it's a film that's very interested in imagery and iconography, right? And we're looking at, when we do cut away from their perspectives, I think it's fascinating that Ross chose to cut to a lot of archival footage and, lots of American cultural iconography of the time, right? We keep on looking at like the moon landing. We keep on looking at like, civil rights protests at the time, all of these things. And
Cell biology as well, that kind of whole
yeah,
science kind of thing that was, yeah.
right. And I think the fact that when we have these flash forwards, you have I mean, what we think is Elba, but learn to be, Turner, of course, right? We have him looking back, and it, we're cutting to imagery, right? That he's finding on the internet. And I think this is a film very concerned with what images are allowed to escape history and who gets to decide what images are allowed to escape history. And because like you have that clear power dynamic, of course, that's established. Even if you don't always see it, there's this sense of like mechanized violence that permeates the entire film. And I think one of the most compelling moments is the fight, right? And the boxing sequence, and him not going down after we see, him being, told to go down in the second round or whatever it was, right? And, that was obviously all covered up. We see in the flash forward, he finds, out about the unmarked graves. We hear about this trial, everything like that. But with the subjectivity of the framing and how the editing constantly chooses to obscure and abstract the violence into this archival footage, feels like such an intentional choice to, let this idea of imagery in, within the context of history enter the conversation. And, you know, what, as we are so restricted to these two characters and what they can see, what else is escaping the vision of history? Because, to look at it in a metatextual sense, a film like this is something that is, telling a historical story that wasn't preserved through imagery. This, we weren't able to see this. And I think, in a greater sense, so much of history now is able to be captured through, phones, right? We can have, live video coming from Palestine or Ukraine or anything like this, where we are seeing this oppression around the world. We can see, videos of cops murdering people in the United States, right? And I think we had this idea that there's more violence now. Well, there isn't, right? It's just that we have the imagery to capture it. We have cameras where we can see it, and then it can be distributed in, a split second across the entire world. And I think as a film placing, kind of, I don't know, like showcasing this, it feels like the wrong word, but putting this on imagery, right? But then still choosing to abstract the actual violence to these other pieces of iconography. I feel like I'm like 90% there with having a thesis on this topic. I think I do need another watch to fully absorb this idea, but I think that RaMell Ross is doing something really, really fascinating through the editing and the imagery that he chooses to represent and in what order he relays information. I think that there's such a fascinating conversation to have about what role images play in shaping history.
And because I also think there's the other thing, the reason the archival footage works in this, whereas say a film like Selma, where it sort of takes you out of the film, and that's Ava DuVernay also doing that in a deliberate way to show that this
Yeah.
is fact and this actually happened, whatever. But the reason that it sort of really works here is because all of the imagery would have also been consumed by these characters. It's not taking you
Right.
out the film, it's showing you what these characters were seeing at that time. So all of these
And you're in
things
their
like the moon
perspective. Yeah.
landings, civil rights, and you are sort of interacting with that imagery in the same way these characters were and are in the film. Which really creates this very interesting interaction between you and the character and furthers putting you in the perspective of this character, which, like, building on the first person perspective. A lot of it is also done through, as we say, the sort of archival footage and the choice to use that to obscure the violence and the fact that it is constantly on their minds, this idea of escape, this idea that they're progressing yet they're still stuck in this place, in this time, in this violence. It's really sort of impressive editing work that shouldn't necessarily work. Like, you should be taking out the film slightly when you're watching Martin Luther King just after Elwood has been killed. You kind of want to see Turner's reaction, but it's again about that restricted voice. Like, no, we don't know Turner's reaction. We don't know the reaction of people.
Yeah, it
like
feels
this
very
to these
claustrophobic
events.
yet
Yeah.
unrestrained at the same time, which is
Yeah, it feels
incredible.
claustrophobic whilst maintaining that level of importance and that sort of grandeur and this idea that this is an important universal event that we should all know, but it also feels like an intimate story that we shouldn't have access to. It's again dealing with these very paradoxical ideas, but somehow, thanks mainly to RaMell Ross's just outstanding vision that he had for this, it all comes together in a
Right.
just
Which it can even just be boiled down
groundbreaking
to
way.
these paradoxes and these opposing views, down to, again, the central conceit of these
The
two
central
opposing
characters,
perspectives
yeah.
that we're seeing
Yeah.
through. And yeah, that final montage, I think so much of the key to the film is in there, which is again something that could have come across as a bit, conceited, privileged, cheap.
Yeah, a bit
But
like the Babylon montage.
which I love and think
Yeah.
works and is fantastic. But it's, I think almost similar to the Babylon montage, it works really well. But I know that that's a much more contentious choice than this is. But yeah, I think a lot of the key to the film is in there, and I think it's almost fascinating that the key to the film and what almost feels like the thesis, the focal point of the film, is something that doesn't include our characters for most of it, because it really is like, it feels like Turner and Elwood, like, they aren't the focus of the film, even though we're seeing the film directly through their eyes. They just feel like surrogates to explore the thesis, which I think is really fascinating. And other directors have done this, where characters aren't necessarily used as the focal point to develop, and the narrative doesn't run through them, right? Which is how you typically think about a film. You have a story, and then it's about the characters interacting with the narrative devices that you've put around them that then develops the film.
Yeah.
And with this, you like, until the end with their escape, you don't see a lot of the characters being active, I guess. It's a lot of things happening to them. They're very passive characters. And the one point where we do see them being active, one of them is killed, right? Which I think lends to this very, like, claustrophobic, like, idea where we are dealing with power structures, all these types of things that we've been talking about. But I think in the same breath, by doing that, it is really purely using these characters as a way to, again, I keep on coming back to the word showcase and explore the central idea, which is, I think, a fascinating way to use characters, again, both textually and formally in the way that the film is shot within this film. It is truly a film that marries text and form in such a way where they're almost inseparable. You can't talk about one without the other. Like, they're so conceptually intertwined.
Yeah. But what I think is also important to note about that is that doesn't mean you don't inherently root for the characters. It doesn't mean
Right, which
that
comes to the
when
performance, as you
watching it,
said.
exactly, which does, like, just because you're using the characters to explore these more universal themes, and you're using the characters as a vehicle in a way, it doesn't mean you are allowed to then just allow the characters to become any old person. Like, you still need characterization. You still need to be rooting for these characters, which is something I think a film like Sing Sing was trying to go for, but it didn't quite manage that to the same level. Sing Sing was also trying to like explore these ideas through basically vehicle characters, but you were never quite rooting for them in the same way you really just wanted Elwood and Turner.
Which is
to
even more
succeed
impressive
monsters.
considering that, you know, these characters aren't even on screen for most of the film. Like,
yeah, for sure. So
yeah. It's I mean, it's a stone cold stunner. Like,
it's an instant classic. It really does belong on every top 10 of the year list, I think.
Like, I would not be shocked if this ends up on Sight and Sound in the next edition 10 years from now. I really truly wouldn't. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's also a film, as I said, that will grow the more you sit with it. It's a film that I feel like we could talk about for, an hour more.
It's a film that begs conversation in the way that the best films sort of do.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's one of the best of the year. Do you have anything else to say, or should we?
No, I mean, no, I think we've covered most of the important stuff, but
yeah, no,
definitely worthy of a rewatch.
Major.
And then,
yeah, for sure. And even just talking about it more, I really want to go back into it. For a rating, what are we feeling?
Well, I was feeling 9 coming in, but part of me is tempted to throw it a 10 because I do just think it is that good. I talked myself into a 10 rating, I think. Yeah. I've talked myself into a 10 rating.
Yeah. Which is your second 10 of the year?
Yeah.
Besides TV Glow?
Besides the TV Glow.
I'm at, I think, a very high 9. Like a very, very high 9. I think this is probably my number 2 of the year. I think I've talked myself into that. This could very well be a 10 on rewatch for me.
I can't criticize it. There is no part of me that wants to criticize it. There's no part of me that can even think of a nitpick I have with it. I think it is
essentially a perfect movie.
That unified of a vision that just really has come together and astounded me.
I'm pretty convinced that this will be a 10 for me if I rewatch it. I think I'm gonna leave it at like a very strong 9 right now. But yeah, this might very well be a 10. It's a stunner. It's fantastic. But that is our review of Nickel Boys. It's not easy to find. We both watched it off of Independent Spirit Screeners, which, lucky to have those, because otherwise this would be a difficult find. I mean, even in the United States,
UK, it's not released yet. I think UK, we have to.
In the US, I think it is only in your major markets, which I am very much not in. So if you're not lucky enough to be in a major market, you're gonna have to wait a second for this one. But like, could not recommend this enough. I don't know why you're still watching if you haven't seen this, because we did just spoil a lot of it. But if for some reason you are, watch.
Although, to be fair, you kind of know where it's going throughout. Like,
sure, yeah. I think I'd be interested,
and that's also part of it. There is this sort of foreboding sense of tragedy that also. Anyway, that's going into more Forza and stuff. But it's not really a spoiler as much as it is obviously a spoiler.
Right. It's more of a spoiler in theory than it is in practice.
Exactly.
Yeah. But anyways, those are our thoughts on Nickel Boys. One of the very best of the year that I think we've only fallen in love with more as we talked about it.
Definitely.
And yes, if you've already seen it, give it a rewatch, because that's what I'll be doing. So that is it for this review. Thank you everybody for watching. More reviews to come, more awards conversations to come. Watch Nickel Boys, please. All right. See you later. Goodbye.